Hi everyone, this is Mindy Eggen. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I thought we would take a closer look on how to use the acetate transfer foil sheets. These not only make beautiful card fronts, but are also really great for shaker cards. So when I was starting to think about this card project and video, I had this sequence mix that's been sitting on my desk, and I was very inspired to use the colors from that mix to create a card front. The other supplies I pulled out are these acetate foil transfer sheets. These are the falling snowflakes. I wasn't sure about a sentiment, so I dug these two sentiments out. One is a die, the other one are reverse sentiment strips. I also thought the Feathery Pines embossing folder would be neat in the background. And then I have the silver sequins fancy foils from Gina K Designs and rectangles and infinity arches from Hero Arts for a frame. And then I have my carrier sheet and a piece of acetate that I did not need. So I figured I'd start with some foiling first. Now I'm going to be using the Fuse foiling machine from Gina K Designs. I plugged it in, hit the button in the back to turn it on, and then hit the button in the center to number 3, and that is going to warm up off on the side. So these are the falling snowflakes from Simon Says Stamp. A lot of companies have these type of foil sheets, but these are the ones that I decided to use today. Now it can be a little tricky. One side is a little shiny, the other side is a little dull. We are going to apply our foil to the dull side. So I'm going to have that flipped up with the dull side facing up because we need the toner or our silver sequins fancy foil to stick to that toner. So off screen, I will take this sheet and I'm going to trim it. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than my acetate panel. So I'll trim it just a little bit bigger than the 4¼ by 5½. Now with your foil, you have the real pretty side and then you have more of a dull side. We want the dull side for right now facing up. And I'm just going to buff over that with a Swiffer cloth. And I'm also going to buff over that acetate sheet with a Swiffer cloth. That's just going to remove any dust or anything that may get in between our foil and our transfer sheet. Then I'm going to place my foil over the top. So my pretty side is always facing up. And I'm going to place that in my carrier sheet. Now, when I am going to enter this into the Fuse foiling system, you always want to have it going so the folded side goes in. I'm going to gently kind of guide that in until the rollers catch it and then let that feed through the machine. Now, it only takes maybe a couple minutes for the fuse to warm up, which is one of the reasons I really love having the fuse foiling system. Now, as I pull this out of the carrier sheet, I will admit I didn't think I did it right because I didn't see any impression through the foil. But as I peel the foil back, you can see the absolutely gorgeous design. Now, don't quote me, I'm pretty sure it was dull side facing up. I think that's what I did. Definitely, there's sheets in there that you can experiment with, but I'm pretty sure I had the dull side facing up. You can always use that leftover foil for another card project or using the Gina K Designs white poly glaze. But I'm just going to use the completed design for right now on the acetate. So my thought process in this was to have snowy trees in the background. So I'm going to ink blend my background using Trio 25 from Simon Says Stamp's Positively Saturated Ink or Positively Saturated Ink. And this is going to go from a really light blue to a dark blue. I'm starting at the bottom of my cardstock. This is Hammermill cardstock. Using my blending brushes, I'm going to blend that light color about a third of the way up. And then I'm going to come in with that second darkest color, coming in from the center. Now, at first, it's going to look like the same color, but as we apply more color to that, you're going to see how it's getting just a little bit darker. I do blend into that lighter color a little bit to get that overlap. And then I'm going to come in with the darkest color at the top. Again, kind of blending into the previous color and get a little more light-handed with the pressure on my brush as I get towards that middle color. So it's going to have a really nice fade and transition between the colors. Once I have my background done, I'm going to place it inside of the Feathery Pines embossing folder. This is a 3D embossing folder. I'm going to put some repositionable tape on the back. The only reason I did that is I wasn't 100% positive what I was going to do with if I was going to do any inking, things like that. And the repositionable tape is actually going to hold my cardstock in the same position. So if I happen to open it or bump it, my cardstock is not going to move and I could run it through the machine again. Now I'm going to be using the Gina K Designs Intri-Cut system. I love this machine for die cutting and all of my embossing folders. It's just really easy to adjust the dials on the side. Now for this one, I adjusted the dial to 3D embossing folder and then -3, I believe. And then I only needed the platform piece. Now, as I opened up the embossing folder, I noticed I could have probably loosened that a little bit more because my cardstock, the white of the cardstock, kind of came through a little bit. So I thought I would go with it. I took a sanding block and I'm going to go over all of those raised areas and just kind of lightly rub over that with the sanding block. That's going to take off some of the color, so it almost looks like they are snowy trees. I can just buff that away with my Swiffer cloth and it's quickly cleaning up my surface as well. I'm going to add a little splatter using the Hero Arts White Iridescent Shimmer Spray. I put a little bit on a block and I just added a dab of water to wet my brush. And then I can splatter the background and this is just going to give it a nice shimmer. Then every now and then I'll bring my pieces together, kind of lay it over the top and see how everything is looking. I did feel like I was losing my trees a little bit, but I was hoping that by popping it up, that would help give it some separation. I decided to go with the infinity arches, so I'm just die cutting one of those sizes out of some white cardstock. I like to leave enough room on the edge so that I can fit foam tape to create a shaker. Now, once again, I adjusted my dials on my Intri-Cut machine, just setting it to die cut and leaving it at 0, and then running that through with the cutting plate and the platform. This is going to create a really nice window for me to kind of pull my scene together. So at any one of these points, you could have stopped. When it comes to that acetate sheet that I had foiled, we could have just done an ink blended background. We could have just done maybe a shaker card, but I kept taking it up a step each time because I had all these products. I wanted to play with them. I love how the card turned out. Again, it was probably a little bit busy. So any one of those steps you could eliminate depending on your preference. So I lined the back of my window with some red line tape. This just needs to secure our acetate in place. I do recommend some sort of double-sided tape. I don't really recommend a liquid glue. You don't want to risk squishing any liquid glue out into your window. So I do recommend like a red line or a double-sided tape and then placing my acetate piece over the top. So now at this point, we have this gorgeous snowflake window. I am going to trim off any little excess that I had hanging over the edge. And then I'm going to flip that back over and I'm going to line the back of my window with some foam tape. Now, I will recommend you probably want to fold your tape in half. I didn't think of that right away, but by folding your tape in half and then taking it to your cardstock, just gives you that depth and dimension that you need for a shaker card. I went through, I lined the entire back of this with the foam tape and then went back through and did it again. The key thing with a shaker card is to always have your foam tape butted up next to the other one. You don't want to leave any gaps or openings for your shaker bits to slide out of. Now, one thing I did keep in mind is that whenever I finish completing a shaker card, I always find it's really hard to adhere it to a card base after the fact. So I am lining the back of my embossed panel with some double-sided tape. This happens to be double-sided tape from Altenew. I like it because it's pretty wide. So I lined the entire back of the embossed panel. Now I flip that over. I have my well for my shaker, and I'm entering in or I'm kind of sprinkling in this sequence mix. Once I have that in there, I taped my corners down with Post-it tape. I tend to do this with my shaker cards because sometimes as I'm pulling up the release paper from the foam tape, my card likes to buckle or bow, and that's just keeping everything in place. Then I can flip my panel over and I'm going to attach it starting on one side and just gently gliding my hand over the card front and then really going through and pressing down to make sure everything is adhered really well. I can then remove the Post-it tape to release my corners. And now I have this beautiful shaker mix. The 2 layers of foam tape really did a great job, so I have enough room to shake my shaker mix, but not overly bulky. Then I can go on the back of that and I can remove the release paper from that double-sided tape and add that to a side folding white card base, making sure that the opening is on the correct side. Then I'm going to work on these sentiments. So I thought the Merry Christmas would just be too much, too big. I thought I would go pretty simple with my sentiment, just a nice black strip. So I'm using the reverse winter sentiments. Now these are foilable if you still have your machine out or you want to have maybe a silver or gold foiled sentiment. You can foil with these. I really like the black. So I trimmed one out and then I'm going to go around the edges with a black Copic marker because it is a white core base. So I'm going to hide the white of that edge with the black Copic marker. I'm going to add some thin black foam squares to the back of that sentiment, or you could build up the dimension with thin black cardstock strips. Then I removed the release paper on that, and I'm adding that to the front of the card. And that is going to finish off the card project. So again, at any point you could have stopped. You didn't need to really do the embossing folder or even the shaker. You could have just added this to a ink blended panel and it would look fantastic. But I hope you have some of these in your stash, or you can head over to Simon Says Stamp to pick some up. They have a huge variety and they just make the best shaker cards. I will have all of my supplies linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.